been a little over a week since wildfires broke out on Maui and decimated the historic town of Lahaina. Towering flames ripped through the town, giving residents only a matter of minutes to escape the inferno. Some people jumped into the ocean to survive. Others were too late. Over 100 people have died, and many still unaccounted for, making it the deadliest fire in the United States in over a century. As response crews continue to search through the rubble for remains, the firefight continues to douse hotspots. Meanwhile, the entire state is in mourning. The videos are harrowing, the stories are heartbreaking. Where do we even begin to process all of this? I spoke with licensed marriage and family therapist Britt Young. She's knowledgeable in various subjects including trauma, PTSD, grief, and coping skills. She explains how to cope with grief and how to help others, especially young children, process traumatic events. And she tells us how to spot people in distress. Let's take a listen. So what's been happening in Lahaina has been weighing heavy on all of our hearts. I know for me, I'm just completely at a loss for words, and it's hard to process, and I can only imagine those who've experienced it firsthand are experiencing grief, anger, loss. So with that, we have marriage and family therapist Britt Young here with us today to kind of navigate how to process such hard emotions and get through traumatic events. So thank you for being here today, Britt.
Thank you for the invite.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
When you have an event of this magnitude, the Lahaina wildfires, and it affects so many people. And as we can see, it not only affected people in Maui, but it's affected the whole entire nation, even internationally. So how do you begin to kind of just process through everything that's been happening?
The super honest answer is that it's super long and really, really hard. There's just nothing simple or easy or quick about it. It's complex and layered. So the way I make sense of it sort of in my own head through my lens is like, we all experience loss, like not necessarily loss of life, but there's loss of dreams, there's loss of friends, there's a lot of loss. But this is different. We all know it. This is what we would call collective, complex, deeply rooted loss. In a matter of minutes, hours, an entire way of life was just eliminated. And what's left is almost nothing. So when events happen on this magnitude, we imagine the losses that we experience in everyday life, and then we orbit out and we multiply it by a gajillion degrees. Because when you have a collective loss like this, what happens is that I'm experiencing my own deep emotions about it, but so are you. So it's not like I can be your comfort necessarily, because I'm also hurting. It's not so dissimilar when a family loses a child. Everybody's hurting, so who's going to be in charge of making you feel better? And so it's enormous. And this morning I talked a little bit about the end date to these things. And what's also very difficult is that we are still not even ended, not even remotely. The fire isn't even extinguished, right? So we're all waiting for a sign, even a small sign, that we can start healing. But we're many weeks away from that. So you have ambiguous, layered, deep grief. You have people and animals and society disappearing all at once. How on earth can the human brain process this except to feel confused and shocked and angry and sad and all the things that everyone's feeling?
Yeah, oh my gosh, you pretty much tackled every layer.
And it's like you said, it's hard to come to words. That's exactly how I feel. I'm very rarely at a loss of words, and I find myself there too. Because how can you name everything that people are processing? So I'm so sorry, I probably didn't even answer the actual question, which is how do you process it? Slowly, steadily, and you are graceful with yourself. Because if you're looking for the fast road toward recovery, it's just simply not there.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to touch upon what kind of grief looks like. What are the steps of grief? And do you think many of us are feeling that?
Yeah. It's a great question. You know, there's all sorts of theories and perspectives around the stages of grief, right? So the original stages of grief came to be because one of the famous psychologists noticed that people who were actually dying themselves went through these stages, and you may have heard of them, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and then acceptance. And they've stayed in place because these steps, these phases of grief seem to be fairly functional. I have an opinion that we are still very much in the shock, early stages, almost like denial, did that actually happen? And yet moving through these stages is important in many ways. When we find people who have acute distress for a long time, sometimes it's because they get stuck. So let's imagine that we are all going to go collectively through these stages, not linearly, but like at some point. Imagine you get stuck in anger. And imagine that you get so angry at whatever system failed us that you can't step out of it. And now you're weeks, maybe months, years into feeling angry. What we look at in grief is like, oh, shoots, we need to help that person and support that person through the anger. Same thing if you're stuck in sadness. So one thing that I recommend my clients do anyway is they put proverbial mental buckets out there. And they're like, okay, that was a wave of sadness. Oh, that was hard. Let me imagine that I'm like putting it in this sadness bucket. I feel so angry. I feel so angry. Let's put that in the anger bucket. And you imagine this process of like putting your feelings somewhere. And those stages of grief are a functional way of doing that. They're simplified. I think complex grief is more complex than the simple stages, but it's a good framework for at least examining and organizing your feelings. So yeah, moving through different stages is normal. It's also normal to go to sadness, pivot back to denial, go to acceptance, stay there for 3 days, and then go back to anger. And it's not all one nice pathway.
Yeah, I think as humans, and maybe you can kind of explain more about this, we feel like it's not okay for us to feel certain things. Is that true?
I mean, my instinct is to say no, but I guess I would say examining one's feelings is okay, but shaming yourself for them doesn't feel okay at all. And by that I mean, like, it may be okay to question, like, I'm feeling guilty. Guilt is one of the prime offenders here. I feel guilty, whether it's survivor's guilt or guilt over something else in your life. And sometimes you just accept it. You go, I feel guilty, so therefore I must have done something wrong. Well, sometimes it's okay to examine a feeling like that and go, should I feel guilty? Like, survivor's guilt is a perfect example. How guilty should I feel that I didn't go through this extraordinary pain personally and like physically like everyone else? If I sit with it long enough, maybe I can come through it and not shame myself for like still being alive, right?
Yeah.
But the other feelings, I say, some people use a road analogy. So you look at your feelings like a car going down a road, and you like, sadness, and you follow it. What's going on? Why am I feeling sad? And you just watch it sort of go into the distance. Some people do it with bubbles. And I mentioned this morning the parts theory of a human, right? So Megan, you are a multi-dimensional human, which means you're not just going to feel one feeling and then that's it for the day. So it's very important to accept that I feel sad, and at the exact same time I feel sad, I feel guilty, and then exactly the same time I feel guilty, I feel angry. Like, we can feel multiple emotions at the same time, and if we were to shame ourselves and go, why are you feeling this? This is ridiculous. Grow up. be a man, be a woman, whatever it is, then we are not honoring that. And the trick about feelings is that the less you honor those and the more you shame yourself over having them, the longer they stick around. So if you're looking to move through a difficult feeling, the last thing you should do is beat yourself up over having it. And the hardest part at times about survivor's guilt is that it backflips into a whole existential crisis almost. Why am I alive and this person isn't? Big question. Is the world fair? Why is the world unfair? I mean, you can really go down into a very deep crevasse of like existential depth, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but also it can take you down a very dark path if you allow yourself to stay too long in the why did I make it out alive and this other person didn't, mindset. Better perhaps to ask yourself, but for the grace of God go I am alive, my family's alive. What am I going to do with the next part of my life? How has this changed me to maybe be of service to my world differently? Maybe I support my friends differently. Can I use this as a life-changing, can I give meaning to this experience by it even changing my trajectory?
Yeah, that's good. And that actually leads me to my next question. So if we do see people who are kind of lost in that, I feel guilty, I don't know what to do, especially young kids who don't know how to process this, let's start with that. How do you help kids process through this traumatic event or any disaster?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Cognitively, right, they have these limitations developmentally, right? My understanding, and I speak out of back in grad school, is that, under the age of 4 or so, right, children are generally looking at their parents. So they are not so in tune with their feelings. They're more in tune with what their parents are feeling. So it's like, is mom okay? Then I'm okay. Is dad sad? Then I'm sad. And so up into a certain age, it's really about supporting the parents and making sure they're okay so they can reflect that to their children. But after the age of 4 or so, these are real feelings that children feel very deeply. What's hard about childhood is that you have the feeling and you don't always know why. You just have it, which is why they're prone to behaviors that are trying to sort out these difficult feelings. One thing that I know a lot of therapists do is a gradual desensitization, a gradual exposure thing, where they present a medium to a child. And this is something people can do at home. You can present a medium to a child, whether it's in the form of drawing, painting, writing, play, doll houses, whatever. And you allow them the space to process their feelings through this other medium. Because they can't necessarily put words to what they're feeling, you give them another opportunity. Can you draw a picture of how you're feeling right now? And you'd be shocked at how astute these young minds are. And how they're putting on paper how they're feeling. And then a really astute parent or somebody, a helper, will be able to look at this and perhaps start to interpret how this child's feeling. And then you can start to have a better conversation or continue the work through the art. That's how I work with children. It's definitely open to interpretation, but I like to give them the space to express what they're feeling without words. And then I help them find the words to describe what they've just done.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah. It takes a little more time and expertise, but anyone can do it. Mom, dad, cousin, uncle.
Yeah. How about young adults and adults?
See, part of the problem with being a grown-up is that you have grown-up understandings of things, And so it's incredibly difficult to manage one's feelings. As a young adult, you're just coming into a sense of self. Who am I? You're making sense of the world around you and your place in it. So when you experience something like this, it's very shaky. It just can shake you because you realize that systems are fallible, that tragedy and catastrophe can happen. The last so big one that I remember, of course, is 9/11, and a lot of young people were not even really born yet, a lot. So it's hard to process this, because it may be the first time a young adult has seen and heard stories about real horror stories.
Yeah.
People trying to escape and who can't. For other adults, perhaps, they have some perspective. What we believe is that as you go through life, the more experience you gain, the more perspective you gain. So this isn't maybe our only tragic experience. We now remember a time when we went through a tragedy, or we witnessed a tragedy, and then we came through the other side. So we pull on that. That's that resilience thing.
Yeah.
So what we do as adults, we go, okay, when was the last time I felt like this, and how did I get through it? And you start to replay how you did it. When I have adults, they're the ones who are hardest on themselves about their feelings. They come in and they're like, I just have to get over it, Britt. I just have to get over it. This is so stupid that I feel this way. And I have to constantly remind them that it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to feel this way. The more you're okay with it, the more you will find your way through it. Yeah. But as adults, we start to beat ourselves up about, I was almost in tears 3 minutes ago. Like, I'm beating myself up going, Britt, hold it together. Do we really need to do that? Can't we just be?
Yeah. Like, it's okay to cry. And if you need to cry.
It's just hard. Like, I'm just imagining. Yeah. I'm putting myself in the perspective of someone trying to escape who can't. And I'm thinking, that would be terrifying. And I'm having like a body experience around it, right?
Me too. I'm like, I'm
hard.
kind of tears.
It's really hard.
Yeah, I don't want us to hold back on this, because I think what people need is to know that they're not alone in what they're experiencing. And I think the government has been doing a really good job at kind of bringing out mental health resources and therapists to be there on call when they need it. But I also think that when we share conversations like this, and if people hear our conversations, it'll bring a lot of healing in the process.
I hope so.
Me too.
I hope so. Because you're right. You're in the news business. You see and experience like hard things every day. I hear hard things every day. And yet here we are, like, feeling a bit of a system overload because this is so big.
Yeah.
So big.
I wanted to touch on what people can look out for if, like, they are in distress, or if they notice somebody else is in distress. Like, what are some signs and symptoms?
Yeah. There's a lot that might show up.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, maybe I can even subset it with children a little bit. So moms and dads and aunties, uncles, things to look out for in young children that could be a sign that they are not processing this in a way that's going to get them through to the finish line is I always look out for like regression and aggression. So regression is like, my child was able to do a certain thing, whether it's tie one's shoes or not wet the bed. And now all these are coming back. That would be a sign to me that like your child is stuck somewhere and is having trouble. And then aggression, right? So children are fascinating in so much as when they can't put something into words, they'll put it into actions. Elementary school children especially, they're around their peers, there's somebody who upsets them, and if you see aggressive behavior that is really uncharacteristic of your child, it's a great opportunity to go, what is going on? But even smaller things, fear of going to school, depending on how much they've been exposed to the news and they know what's going on over there, like I wouldn't be surprised if some children are very nervous around fire.
Yeah, that's true.
Any children who have been who smelled the smoke over in Lahaina for years, I imagine they'll smell smoke and have like a visceral like body response to that. It's a very distinct smell, right? So you can hear and see and smell things and taste things that bring you right back to the moment. That's what we call sort of like that post-trauma. So if you notice that in your child and that they're not moving, they're not progressing through it. But with adults, many of that, not the regressive behaviors as much, but you're going to see irrational fears. I didn't used to be afraid of this thing and now I am. Perhaps like depressive mood. depressive mood in so much as I don't feel like getting out of bed today or tomorrow or the next day. Nightmares, insomnia, and nightmares show up. They show up in children too, but especially in adults, we manifest a lot of our daily anxieties in our REM sleep. And so if we have insomnia, we're not getting our REM sleep, and then that just exacerbates the feedback loop of sleeplessness and fatigue. If you feel combative, things make you mad that didn't used to make you mad. If you feel weepy, teary, and all these things are normal, like there's a line along which these things are very normal. And a good friend and even your own intuition will tell you, yes, it's normal to feel anxious because things are very scary. They feel worrisome right now, but this feels unhealthy. And maybe a good friend will say, it seems a little unhealthy. So those are just some of the common symptoms. I would say some of the sleep stuff is the first place to start to go. Your body manifests trauma sometimes before your mind does. And so you will feel things through your body, stomach aches, nausea. Some of my clients will go through trauma and they'll tell me something's stuck here. And they'll even go to the doctor. I'm pointing to my neck. They'll go to the doctor and say, something's stuck in my throat. Nothing's stuck in their throat. They're holding it all here. Yeah. So very body specific, yeah?
Yeah. So I guess in the moment, if they do notice this, what are some things they can do physically to kind of gain control of what's happening?
So something that might seem a little silly, but it's not. Sit on the floor. Something about grounding yourself to the floor is your body's way of going, okay, I'm connected to something else on this planet, more than maybe a chair or standing. And I like to do this mindfulness exercise where I take a deep breath and then I notice things. I see 3 light bulbs. I see 2 windows. I see a wooden floor. I smell the air conditioning. You go through each sense. I smell, I hear, I see. The trick is to take your mind out of that very scary place and give it a breather. So sit on the floor and look around you and notice and count even tiles, stones in the wall. That can just give you your cognitions a break from because once your brain starts going in a direction, it's like it's going to go. So if you can disrupt that trauma response, it can feel much better, and then you can reset.
I love that. I didn't really think sitting on the ground would help, but that makes so much
silly.
sense.
I don't ever mention it because people are like, you're crazy. But no, sitting on the ground is called grounding. There's a word for that.
You ground yourself to something else. Sometimes laying on the ground, you feel part of the world again. Yeah, you're not floating. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try that after this.
Okay, there we go. Me too. We'll do it together.
Let's do it right after this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I kind of want to touch on one last thing.
Sure.
So a common theme we've been hearing from a lot of the survivors and those who are on Maui who are helping the community is that they're holding on to hope. What is the best way or best ways we can help support those who've lost so much and bring them that hope?
That's really hard. I take a pause because I'm a big fan of hope.
Me too.
And I think hope is universal and healthy. And yet, I think my instinct says to let people have their grief and their sadness before we start to perhaps give them the hopeful message. Like perhaps right now they need to not feel hopeful. And that's a really hard thing to say, especially for me who loves hope. The reason I say that is because in the moment, what we want to do is validate where they are right now. And if they're in a really difficult space right now, we need to just sit there with them. Yeah. And you're in a bad place, I'll be in a bad place with you. However, part of that support is not living there forever. And that will be the message of hope that comes out of it. So my advice would be to initially just be wherever that person is. If they hate the world right now, hate the world with them. If they are angry at the universe or a spiritual deity, be angry with them. And then typically what will happen is they will make a magical pivot down the line and want to feel hopeful and want to feel like life is okay again. And guess what we do as our support partners? We take the ride right with them. So when they're ready to be hopeful, we're ready to be hopeful. And so we just kind of go along. You know, there's one thing that I haven't yet brought up in any of these interviews is post-traumatic growth. So there's post-traumatic stress disorder, which we're all familiar with, that fight or flight that sits with you for so long that it becomes like part of your whole being, right? That's what a lot of people will feel. But about 30 to 50% of the population, maybe more, will end up with this tremendous growth after this. So if there is hope, it's going to be a collective like growth. And what people will often tell me is that after a fairly traumatic experience, after a deeply traumatic experience even, they feel that they have grown as a human by virtue of going through this really horrible thing. I think we're many moons away from that. We're still in phase one where it's like we are devastated. But if there's hope to be discussed down the line, perhaps it's that.
The Department of Health is offering crisis mental health services to those who are experiencing emotional or psychological distress as a result of the Maui wildfires. For more information, along with a full list of resources, visit hawaiinewsnow.com. I'm Megan Ramones for Hawaii News Now.